The stagecoach lurched violently as the driver whipped the horses into a frenzy, dust billowing behind them like a storm cloud across the Nevada desert, and Katherine Hayes gripped the wooden seat until her knuckles turned white, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized someone was deliberately trying to lose her in the wilderness. She had paid her fare in Carson City 3 days ago, clutching her small leather bag containing everything she owned in this world. The journey to Sacramento should have been straightforward, but when they stopped in Lovelock, Nevada to change horses, everything had gone wrong. The original driver, a kindly man named Mr. Peterson, had taken ill suddenly, writhing in pain and vomiting behind the station. A new driver had climbed aboard, a thin man with cold eyes who said nothing when Katherine asked if Mr. Peterson would be all right. They had left Lovelock an hour ago heading west, but instead of following the established trail, this new driver had veered north into rough country. Katherine was not alone in the coach. Mrs. Sarah Donovan, a widow traveling to meet her sister, sat across from her, and next to Katherine was young Timothy Grant, barely 18, heading to California to seek his fortune in what remained of the gold fields. "This is not the right road," Mrs. Donovan said, her voice tight with fear. She was a woman of perhaps 40 years, with graying hair tucked beneath a sensible bonnet. "I've made this journey twice before. We should be following the Humboldt River." Katherine pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape grow increasingly wild and desolate. Sagebrush stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by jagged rock formations that rose from the earth like ancient sentinels. The Sierra Nevada mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow, despite it being June of 1878. "Maybe he knows a shortcut," Timothy offered, though his voice lacked conviction. He was a gangly youth with sandy hair and nervous hands that constantly fidgeted with his hat. The coach suddenly jerked hard to the left, throwing all 3 passengers against the side. Katherine cried out as her shoulder slammed into the wooden frame. The horses were screaming now, driven beyond their endurance, and the coach careened over rocks and through gullies that threatened to overturn them entirely. "He is going to kill us all!" Mrs. Donovan shrieked. Katherine leaned out the window, gripping the frame. "Stop! Please, stop this coach immediately!" The driver did not even turn his head. He brought the whip down again and again, and Katherine saw foam flying from the horses' mouths. They were being driven to death, and for what purpose she could not fathom. Then she understood. The driver was not trying to kill them. He was trying to lose someone, or more specifically, lose her. Her uncle. It had to be her uncle. Katherine sank back into her seat, her mind racing. She had fled Philadelphia 6 months ago after her parents died of typhoid fever, leaving her in the custody of her father's brother, Edmund Hayes. Uncle Edmund had seemed kind at first, but within weeks he had informed her that she would marry his business partner, a man of 53 years who already had buried 2 wives. When Katherine refused, her uncle had locked her in a room, telling her she would learn obedience or learn hunger. She had escaped through the window one night, climbing down a trellis in her nightgown, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket. She had worked her way west, taking whatever respectable employment she could find, staying ahead of the private detectives her uncle had surely hired to bring her back. But she had thought herself safe once she reached Nevada. She had thought the vast distance would be enough. She had been wrong. The coach hit a boulder and went airborne for a breathless moment. When it crashed back to earth, the sound of splintering wood filled the air. The right rear wheel had cracked. The vehicle tilted dangerously, dragging now, and the horses were mad with panic. Katherine grabbed Mrs. Donovan's hand. "We have to jump! The coach is going to break apart! We will be killed!" the older woman sobbed. "We will be killed if we stay!" Timothy was already at the door, wrestling with the handle. He got it open just as the coach lurched again, and he tumbled out, hitting the ground hard and rolling. Katherine did not hesitate. She gathered her skirts and jumped, pulling Mrs. Donovan with her. The earth rose up fast and brutal. Katherine hit the hard-packed dirt and felt the air explode from her lungs. She rolled, rocks tearing at her dress and skin, and came to rest against a clump of sagebrush that scratched her face. Dazed, she lifted her head in time to see the coach continue its wild flight, the broken wheels screaming in protest. Then, perhaps 200 yards ahead, the entire rear axle gave way. The coach flipped, tumbling end over end in a cloud of dust and debris. The horses, still attached by their harnesses, were dragged down with it, the terrible sounds of dying animals carried across the desert. Then silence. Katherine pushed herself to her hands and knees, spitting blood from a split lip. "Mrs. Donovan? Timothy?" "Here," came Timothy's shaken voice. He appeared from behind a rock, limping but alive. Together they found Mrs. Donovan, who had a badly bruised arm but was otherwise intact. The three of them stood in the middle of the Nevada wilderness, watching the dust settle around the destroyed stagecoach. The driver was nowhere to be seen. He must have jumped clear at some point, or perhaps he was buried in the wreckage. "What do we do now?" Timothy asked. Katherine looked around at the empty landscape. The sun was merciless overhead, and they had no water, no supplies, and no idea where they were. The town of Lovelock was at least 10 miles behind them, possibly more given the erratic path the driver had taken. "We walk," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We follow our tracks back toward the main road." They had barely taken 20 steps when Mrs. Donovan pointed toward the wreckage. "Someone is coming." Katherine turned and felt her stomach drop. A figure on horseback had appeared on a rise behind the crashed stagecoach. Even at this distance, she could tell it was not a rescue party from Lovelock. The rider sat too still, too watchful. "Run," she whispered. Then, louder, "Run." They scattered, heading for the rocks. Katherine's boots, designed for city streets, slipped on the loose stone. She could hear Mrs. Donovan gasping behind her, hear Timothy's panicked breathing. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Katherine risked a glance back and saw two riders now, both coming fast. They were going to be caught. There was nowhere to hide in this open country, nowhere to go. She stumbled into a shallow ravine, her dress catching on thorns. She yanked it free, leaving a long strip of fabric behind, and kept running. Her lungs burned. Sweat poured down her face. The hoofbeats were thunder now, right behind her. Then, a different sound split the air. A rifle shot, sharp and clear, echoing off the rocks. Katherine froze, her heart in her throat. She turned slowly. The two riders had stopped their horses. They were looking up at a rocky outcropping to the north. Katherine followed their gaze and saw him. A man stood silhouetted against the sky, a rifle braced against his shoulder. Even from a distance of 100 yards, he was an imposing figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, with long dark hair that fell past his collar, he looked like something from an earlier age, like the mountain men Katherine had read about in dime novels. He wore buckskins and a wide-brimmed hat, and he held that rifle as steady as stone. He did not fire again. He did not need to. The two riders exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses around and took off back the way they had come, heading east at a full gallop. Katherine stood frozen, watching them disappear into the heat shimmer. Then she looked back up at the outcropping. The man was gone. She blinked, wondering if she had imagined him, if the sun in terror had conjured a ghost, but the echo of the rifle shot still rang in her ears. "Did you see that?" Timothy appeared at her elbow, his face flushed and frightened. "Who was that man?" "I do not know," Katherine said slowly. Mrs. Donovan joined them, clutching her bruised arm. "He saved us. Those men would have caught us for certain." They waited in the ravine for several minutes, unsure what to do. Katherine's mind was racing. The riders had been sent by her uncle, she was certain of it. They would report back that the attempt to lose her in the wilderness had failed, but that she was stranded. More men would come, better prepared men. She needed to reach Sacramento. She needed to disappear into a city large enough to hide her. But first, she needed to survive the Nevada desert. "Hello down there." Katherine spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. The man stood on the rim of the ravine above them, having approached in absolute silence. Up close, he was even more formidable than he had appeared from a distance. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a powerfully built frame that spoke of hard living and harder work. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. His eyes, shaded by the brim of his hat, were an unusual gray-green color, sharp and assessing. He carried the rifle loosely in one hand, pointed at the ground, no threat in his posture but no weakness either. "You folks all right?" His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "Yes," Katherine managed. "Thanks to you, I believe." He tipped his hat slightly. "Name is Victor Maddox. I have a camp about 2 miles north of here. You all look like you could use water and shade." "We need to get back to Lovelock," Mrs. Donovan said. "Can you take us there?" Victor looked east, his eyes narrowing. "Those riders might circle back with reinforcements. Town is a long walk from here, and you would be exposed on the main trail. My camp is secure. You can rest there, and I will guide you back to civilization come nightfall when it is safer to move." Katherine studied him carefully. He could be another threat, another man hired by her uncle. But instinct told her otherwise. There was something straightforward about Victor Maddox, something honest in the way he met her eyes. "Why did you help us?" she asked. He shrugged, a movement that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "Because you needed help. That is reason enough in this country." Timothy looked between Katherine and Mrs. Donovan. "I think we should trust him. We do not have many other options." Katherine knew he was right. The sun was climbing higher, the heat was becoming dangerous, and they had no supplies. She nodded slowly. "We accept your kind offer, Mr. Maddox, and we are very grateful." Something flickered in his gray-green eyes, though whether it was amusement or approval, Katherine could not tell. He shouldered his rifle and gestured for them to follow him. "This way. Watch your step. Rattlesnakes like this kind of terrain." They followed him through the rocks, climbing out of the ravine and heading north. Victor moved with the easy confidence of a man completely at home in the wilderness. He did not struggle with the uneven ground or hesitate in choosing his path. He simply moved, and the land seemed to accommodate him. Katherine found herself watching the way his muscles shifted beneath the buckskin shirt, the way his long hair moved across his shoulders. She had never seen a man like him before. The men of her acquaintance in Philadelphia had been soft, civilized, bound by strict rules of etiquette and fashion. Victor Maddox looked like he had been carved from the mountains themselves, all hard edges and raw strength. They walked for the better part of an hour, and Katherine was stumbling with exhaustion by the time Victor led them into a narrow canyon. A small spring bubbled from between rocks, creating a pool of clear water before disappearing back into the earth. Next to the spring was a simple camp, a lean-to shelter built against the canyon wall, a fire ring made of carefully placed stones, and supplies stacked neatly under a canvas tarp. "Sit," Victor said, gesturing to the shade of the lean-to. "I will get water." He pulled tin cups from his supplies and filled them at the spring, bringing them over. Katherine drank gratefully, the cold water soothing her parched throat. Victor refilled the cups twice more before everyone's immediate thirst was satisfied. "Thank you," Katherine said again. "You have been extraordinarily kind." Victor settled onto his heels near the fire ring, his rifle across his knees. What happened out there? That stagecoach was being driven like the devil himself was chasing it. Katherine hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but Mrs. Donovan, practical as always, had no such reservations. "The driver went mad," she said. "He drove us straight off the road into the wilderness, pushing those poor horses until the coach fell apart. Then those riders came after us. I do not understand any of it." Victor's gaze shifted to Katherine, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny. "You understand it, though, do you not, Miss?" "Hayes," she said quietly. "Katherine Hayes. And yes, I believe I do. I think this was all meant to prevent me from reaching Sacramento." "Someone wants to stop you that badly?" Katherine met his eyes. There was something about this man, this stranger who had saved her life, that made her want to tell the truth. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he asked questions, with no games or manipulation. Perhaps it was simply that she was tired of running alone. "My uncle wants me back in Philadelphia. I am his ward, and he has plans for me that I do not share. He has resources, and he is not above using them to bend the world to his will." Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Katherine found herself unable to look away from those unusual gray-green eyes. They were intelligent eyes, watchful, missing nothing. "You are running," he said finally. It was not a question. "I am trying to make a life for myself, one where I am not property to be traded or sold." Something shifted in Victor's expression, a tightening around his eyes. "I understand that. I ran once myself, from a life I did not choose. That was 7 years ago. I have been in these mountains ever since." "You are a mountain man," Timothy said, his voice filled with awe. "I have read about men like you, trappers and scouts who live in the wilderness." "I trap some," Victor acknowledged, "hunt more, guide occasionally when folks need help finding their way through this country. Mostly I live quiet and do not bother anyone." "Until you see people in trouble," Katherine said softly. He met her eyes again, and this time she saw a hint of a smile. "Until then." They rested through the hottest part of the day. Victor prepared a simple meal of dried meat and pan bread, cooking over a small fire that produced almost no smoke. He moved with the efficiency of long practice, every action purposeful and measured. Katherine watched him as she ate, fascinated despite herself. Mrs. Donovan dozed in the shade, exhausted by the ordeal. Timothy peppered Victor with questions about life in the mountains, which Victor answered with patient good humor. But Katherine noticed that his attention kept returning to her, his gaze thoughtful. As the afternoon wore on and the heat began to ease, Victor stood and checked his rifle, then loaded his saddlebags with supplies. His horse, a sturdy gray gelding, had been tethered deeper in the canyon where there was grass. Victor brought the animal forward and began to saddle him. "I will scout back toward where that coach went down," he said. "See if those riders are still in the area. You folks stay here and rest. I will be back before sunset." "Is that safe?" Katherine asked, rising to her feet. "What if they see you?" "They will not see me unless I want them to." He said it without arrogance, simply stating a fact. "I need to know what we are dealing with before I try to move you." He swung into the saddle with easy grace, the horse dancing slightly beneath his weight. Katherine stepped forward, compelled by an impulse she did not fully understand. "Mr. Maddox, I want you to know that I am grateful, but I do not want you risking your life for strangers." He looked down at her from the saddle, and the afternoon sun caught his eyes, turning them almost golden. "I do not consider you strangers anymore, Miss Hayes, and I always finish what I start." Then he touched his hat brim in a quick salute and rode out of the canyon, moving south toward the site of the wreck. Katherine stood watching until he disappeared from view, feeling oddly bereft. Mrs. Donovan joined her, looking thoughtful. "That is a good man," the older woman said. "Hard to find these days. We barely know him. Sometimes you can know a person's character in an instant. Other times, years of acquaintance teach you nothing. I trust my instincts, and my instincts say Victor Maddox is the kind of man you can rely on." Katherine did not reply, but she felt the same. There was something solid about Victor, something dependable. In a world that had proven treacherous and uncertain, he felt like bedrock. The sun was sliding toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and gold, when the sound of hoofbeats announced Victor's return. He rode into camp looking grim, and Katherine's stomach tightened. "What did you find?" she asked. He dismounted and began unsaddling his horse. "The coach is a total loss. The horses all had to be put down, poor beasts. I found the driver's body in the wreckage. His neck was broken." "Miss Webb," Donovan crossed herself. "God rest his soul." There were tracks all around the site, at least 6 different horses, maybe more. They were searching the area. Victor looked directly at Katherine. "They were looking for you. I heard them talking. They mentioned a woman fitting your description, said they were hired out of Carson City to make sure you did not make it to California." Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. 6 men? My uncle sent 6 men? At least, there might be more. Victor finished with his horse and turned to face her fully. "Miss Hayes, I think you need to tell me exactly what you are running from, the whole story, because this is more than just an uncle wanting his ward back." Katherine sank down onto a flat rock, her legs suddenly weak. She looked at Mrs. Donovan and Timothy, then back to Victor. They deserved to know. They were all in danger now because of her. "My father was wealthy," she began quietly. "He owned textile mills in Philadelphia. When he and my mother died, everything passed to my uncle as trustee of my inheritance until I marry or turn 25. I am 21 now. If I marry, my husband controls the inheritance. If I die, it all goes to my uncle." Victor's expression darkened. "How much money are we talking about?" "Nearly $200,000. Timothy whistled low. Mrs. Donovan gasped. Victor's jaw tightened. "So your uncle wants you married to someone he controls, or dead? Either way, he gets the money." "Yes." Katherine felt tears threaten but forced them back. She had not cried through any of this, and she would not start now. "I thought if I could just reach California and disappear, I could start over. Find work, make a life. When I turned 25, I planned to hire lawyers to fight for what is rightfully mine. But I never expected him to go this far." $200,000 is worth going pretty far for," Victor said. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he looked at Katherine with an intensity that made her breath catch. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I will get you to Sacramento. Mrs. Donovan and young Timothy, too. But we are not taking the main roads. We are going through the mountains." "The Sierra Nevada?" Katherine asked. "But that is a difficult crossing even with proper equipment." "Not if you know the right trails. I have guided hunting parties through high country more times than I can count. It will add days to the journey, but it will keep you alive. Your uncle's men will be watching every stage station and main road between here and California. Mr. Maddox, I cannot ask you to do this. You have already done so much." He stepped closer, and Katherine had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This close, she could see the lines that weathering and hard living had etched into his face, could see the flecks of gold in those gray-green eyes. He was handsome in a rough, untamed way that made her heart beat faster. "You're not asking," he said quietly. "I am offering. Those men out there, they are no better than murderers. I do not abide that kind of behavior, and besides—" He paused, something almost vulnerable crossing his face. "I have been alone in these mountains for 7 years. Maybe it is time I did something that matters again." Katherine found herself unable to look away from him. "Why did you come to the mountains? What were you running from?" "A war that would not leave me alone," he said. "I fought for the Union, was at Gettysburg and Cold Harbor, and a dozen other battles that turned boys into ghosts. When it was over, I could not settle back into civilization. Everything was too loud, too close, too full of memories. So I came west and kept going until I found silence." Katherine understood. She had seen the haunted veterans on the streets of Philadelphia, men whose bodies had survived but whose spirits remained on the battlefield. Victor had survived too, but he had done it by leaving the world of men behind. Until now. "We leave at dawn," Victor said, stepping back and breaking the strange intimacy of the moment. "It will be a hard journey. You will need better clothes, Miss Hayes. That dress will not survive mountain travel." Katherine looked down at her torn and dusty dress, once a respectable travel outfit, now little more than rags. "I have nothing else. I have extra shirts and pants. They will be too big, but we can make them work. Better too big than getting your skirts caught on rocks or branches." The idea of wearing trousers was scandalous, but Katherine had left behind the world of scandal and propriety when she fled Philadelphia. "Thank you. I will make do." They prepared through the evening. Victor produced a second rifle and began teaching Timothy how to load and aim it. "Just in case," he said, "every person in this group needs to be able to defend themselves." He also gave Katherine a hunting knife in a leather sheath, showing her how to wear it on her belt. As night fell, they gathered around the fire. Victor had cooked a better meal this time, venison stew with wild onions and herbs he had foraged. It was surprisingly good, and Katherine found herself eating hungrily, her appetite restored now that she had a plan. "Tell me about Sacramento," Victor said as they ate. "What will you do when you get there?" "Find work," Katherine said. "I can sew, and I have a good head for figures. My father let me help with his business accounts sometimes. I thought perhaps I could find work in a dress shop or as a bookkeeper." "Using your real name?" Katherine hesitated. She had not thought that far ahead. "I suppose I will have to change it." "Yes," Victor agreed. "At least for now. Your uncle will have people looking in Sacramento too, but if you are using a different name and staying away from places a wealthy woman might frequent, you should be able to avoid notice." It was strange, planning a new identity with this man she had met only hours ago, but Victor approached it practically, the way he approached everything, and his calm competence was reassuring. Mrs. Donovan yawned. "I must sleep. This old body has been through too much today." Victor had already prepared sleeping areas under the lean-to, simple bedrolls arranged on canvas. "Ladies, take the shelter. Timothy and I will sleep out here by the fire." Katherine lay down on the bedroll, her body aching from the day's ordeal. Through the opening of the lean-to, she could see Victor sitting by the fire, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. The sight was comforting. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt truly safe. She woke once in the night to the sound of footsteps. Heart pounding, she sat up and reached for the knife Victor had given her, but it was only Victor himself, moving quietly around the camp, checking the perimeter. He did not notice she was awake, and Katherine watched him in the moonlight, this guardian stranger who had appeared when she needed him most. He looked up at the stars for a long moment, and Katherine saw loneliness in the set of his shoulders, in the way he stood apart from the sleeping camp. He was a man used to solitude, perhaps even comfortable with it. But there was a cost to that solitude, she thought, a cost he paid in isolation. She wanted to call out to him, to say something that would ease that loneliness, but she did not know what to say, and eventually Victor completed his patrol and settled back down by the fire. Katherine lay back down and stared at the canvas above her head, thinking about the mountain man who had saved her life, and wondering what it would mean to save his in return. Dawn came cold and clear. Katherine woke to find Victor already moving around the camp, packing supplies and preparing for the journey. He had laid out a set of clothes for her, a cotton shirt, wool pants, and a leather vest. The pants had been cut down and crude stitches added to make them shorter, though they would still be far too large. She changed behind a screen of canvas, grateful for the privacy. The pants felt strange after a lifetime of skirts, but she had to admit they were practical. She cinched them tight with a belt and rolled up the cuffs, then put on the shirt and vest. When she emerged, Timothy's eyes went wide, and Mrs. Donovan looked scandalized, but Victor simply nodded approvingly. "That will do. You will be able to move easier in rough country." They ate a quick breakfast, then broke camp. Victor packed everything with military precision, leaving no trace of their presence. He saddled his horse and loaded the supplies, then turned to the group. "Mrs. Donovan, you will ride. Timothy and Miss Hayes will walk with me. We will trade off so everyone gets rest. The going will be slow at first, but that is all right. We are not racing, we are being smart." "Where exactly are we going?" Timothy asked. Victor pointed northwest. "There is an old mining road that cuts through the mountains. It is not much used anymore since the mines played out, but it is still passable if you know where to look. We will follow that to a pass I know, then down into California on the western slope. If we keep a good pace and the weather holds, we should reach Sacramento in 8 or 9 days." "8 or 9 days?" Mrs. Donovan said faintly. "I was expecting 1 more day of travel." "The safe route is the long route," Victor said, "but I promise you will get there alive, and that is more than you could promise on the main road right now." He helped Mrs. Donovan mount the horse, then shouldered his pack and his rifle. "Follow me. Stay close and stay quiet. We will stop to rest every few hours." They set out as the sun was rising, painting the Nevada landscape in shades of gold and purple. Victor led them through terrain that seemed impassable, finding paths between rocks and through narrow canyons that Katherine would never have noticed on her own. He moved steadily, but not hurriedly, always aware of their limitations. Katherine found herself walking behind him, watching the easy way he navigated the wilderness. He would pause occasionally to point out landmarks or to help someone over a difficult spot, his strong hands steady and sure. When Katherine slipped on loose gravel, he caught her arm without hesitation, his grip firm but gentle. "Careful," he said, and the warmth in his voice sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Thank you," she managed. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then released her arm and continued walking. But Katherine noticed that he stayed closer after that, always within reach should she stumble again. They walked until mid-morning, then rested in the shade of a rock formation while Victor scouted ahead. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "There are riders on the main trail," he said. 3 of them heading west. They are watching for travelers." "The men searching for me?" Katherine asked. "Most likely. Which means your uncle has people stationed at intervals all along the route to California. They are being thorough." "He always is," Katherine said bitterly. Victor crouched beside her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" The question surprised her. No one had asked her that in months. She had been so focused on surviving, on running, that she had not allowed herself to think about how she felt. "I am frightened," she admitted, "and angry, and tired of running. But I am all right because you are helping us, so thank you, Victor, for everything." It was the first time she had used his given name, and something flickered in his eyes when he heard it. "Katherine," he said, testing her name on his tongue. "It suits you." They held each other's gaze, and Katherine felt something shift between them, something nameless but powerful. Then Mrs. Donovan coughed delicately, and the moment broke. Victor stood. "We should keep moving. I want to make the foothills before nightfall." They continued northwest, gradually climbing into higher country. The sagebrush gave way to juniper and pinon pine, and the air grew cooler. Katherine's legs ached and her feet hurt, but she did not complain. Beside her, Timothy struggled more openly, unused to this kind of physical exertion. Victor noticed and adjusted their pace, adding more rest stops without making it obvious he was doing so for the boy's sake. By the time the sun was setting, they had reached the true foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Victor led them to a sheltered spot beneath a rock overhang where a previous traveler had built a fire ring. "We can risk a fire tonight," he said. "We are far enough from the main trail that no one will see the smoke." He built the fire with practiced ease while Katherine and Mrs. Donovan unpacked supplies. Timothy collapsed onto the ground, groaning. "I have never walked so far in my life," the boy said. "You did well," Victor told him. "Tomorrow will be easier. Your body is learning." They ate dinner as darkness fell, and for the first time, the conversation turned to lighter topics. Mrs. Donovan told stories about her children in California, and Timothy talked about his dreams of striking it rich. Victor listened more than he spoke, but when Katherine asked about his life before the war, he shared a few memories. "I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia," he said, staring into the fire. "My father was a farmer, honest but poor. I had 2 brothers and a sister. When the war came, all 3 of us boys enlisted. I was the only one who came home." "I'm so sorry," Katherine said softly. "It was a long time ago." But the pain in his voice said it was not long enough. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked. "Sometimes. But there's nothing left for me there. My parents are dead. My sister married and moved to Georgia. The farm was sold for taxes during the war." He looked up at the stars appearing overhead. "These mountains are my home now. I have made peace with that." Katherine wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she moved closer to him, sitting near enough that their shoulders almost touched. He glanced at her, and she saw surprise in his eyes, followed by something that might have been gratitude. They sat together in comfortable silence while Mrs. Donovan and Timothy dozed. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "Why did you really help us?" Katherine asked quietly. "The truth." Victor was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because when I saw those men chasing you, I saw something I recognized. Predators hunting someone weaker. I saw enough of that during the war to last several lifetimes, and I thought, not this time. This time I can stop it." "You are a good man, Victor Maddox. I am a man who tries to do right when he can. That is all anyone can be." Katherine turned to look at him fully. In the firelight, his face was all strong lines and shadows, impossibly handsome in a rugged way that made her breath catch. "It is more than most people manage." He met her eyes, and the intensity of his gaze made her heart race. "You are brave, Katherine Hayes, running from a life you did not want, surviving on your own all these months. That takes courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they are the same thing." She smiled at that, and he returned it, a rare expression that transformed his face from stern to warm. Katherine realized with a start that she was attracted to this man, truly attracted in a way she had never experienced before. The men who had courted her in Philadelphia had been polished and proper, but they had also been boring, interchangeable. Victor was different. He was real and solid and present in a way those other men had never been. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Victor seemed to sense her thoughts. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back up, and Katherine saw desire there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Her breath caught. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough. Yes?" But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by Timothy sitting up abruptly. "Did you hear that?" Victor was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard horses." They all fell silent, listening. Katherine strained her ears but heard nothing except the wind in the pines and the crackling fire. "You probably heard an elk," Victor said after a moment. "They move through these hills at night, but it is a good reminder. We need to be alert always." He checked the perimeter of their camp, then returned to the fire. The moment of intimacy between him and Katherine had passed, but the awareness remained, humming in the air between them like a plucked string. They slept in shifts that night, Victor and Timothy taking turns keeping watch. When Katherine woke in the small hours before dawn, it was Victor who sat by the fire, silhouetted against the dying flames. She watched him for a while, this unlikely protector who had entered her life like something from a story. Then she rose and joined him. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning around. "So should you. I'm used to keeping watch. It does not bother me." Katherine sat beside him, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the mountain chill. "Will you tell me about the mountains, about your life here?" So he did. In a low voice, he described the turning of the seasons in the high country, the harsh beauty of winter when snow buried everything and the only sounds were wind and the crack of ice. He told her about tracking elk and deer, about finding mountain lion kills and giving the big cats wide berth. He spoke of storms that could kill an unprepared man in hours and springs that arrived late, transforming the landscape from white to green almost overnight. Katherine listened, entranced. His life sounded impossibly hard, but also impossibly free, governed by natural laws rather than social ones. She found herself envious of that freedom, even as she recognized how difficult it must be to survive alone. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted, "but loneliness is better than being surrounded by people who do not understand you. At least, that is what I tell myself. What if you found someone who did understand?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Katherine felt the full force of his attention. "I do not know," he said quietly. "I have not let myself think about it." "Maybe you should." "Maybe." His eyes searched her face. "Katherine, when this is over and you are safe in Sacramento, what will you do? Build a life. Try to be happy. You deserve that. You deserve safety and happiness and a chance to choose your own path." "So do you," she said fiercely. "You cannot hide in these mountains forever, Victor. That is not living. That is just a slower way of dying." He flinched as if she had struck him. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Perhaps you are right, but I do not know how to be anything other than what I am now. You could learn. You are learning right now by helping us." He smiled at that, a sad, tentative expression. "Perhaps." They sat together until dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And when they woke the others and prepared to continue the journey, Katherine felt something had changed between them. Some barrier had fallen away. The next 3 days passed in a blur of mountain travel. Victor led them higher into the Sierra Nevada, following trails that were barely visible to Katherine's inexperienced eyes. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, all steep slopes and rocky passes, but Victor navigated it with absolute confidence. Katherine found herself growing stronger, her body adapting to the constant exertion. Her initial fear faded, replaced by a growing wonder at the landscape around them. The mountains were beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, full of hidden valleys and sudden vistas that took her breath away. Victor was an excellent guide, patient with their limitations but always pushing them to cover more ground. He taught them how to read the landscape, how to find water, how to recognize the signs of animal passage. At night, he would point out constellations and tell stories about the territories he had explored. Katherine found herself falling for him a little more each day. It was not just his strength or his competence, though both were attractive. It was the kindness he showed Mrs. Donovan when her feet blistered, the patience he displayed teaching Timothy to fish in a mountain stream, the way his eyes softened when he looked at Katherine when he thought she was not watching, and he was watching her. Katherine caught him doing it often, his gaze following her as she moved around camp or walked the trail. The attraction between them was palpable now, acknowledged in small touches and long glances, though neither spoke of it openly. On the 4th night, they camped beside an alpine lake, so clear Katherine could see stones 20 feet down. Victor caught trout for dinner, and they feasted like royalty. The fresh fish, a welcome change from dried meat and hard biscuits. After dinner, Mrs. Donovan and Timothy went to sleep early, exhausted by the day's climb. Katherine and Victor sat by the lake watching moonlight shimmer on the water. "We are making good time," Victor said. "2 more days to the pass, then 3 days down to Sacramento. You will be safe soon." Katherine should have felt relieved, but instead she felt a strange sadness. "And then you will go back to your mountains. That is the plan." "What if you did not?" The words were out before she could stop them. Victor turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Katherine took a breath, gathering her courage. "I mean, what if you came to Sacramento too? found work as a guide or a hunter, you would not have to be alone anymore, Victor. I would not fit in a city, Katherine. You have seen how I live. I am not civilized anymore. Civilization is overrated, she said, and you are more of a gentleman than any of the so-called gentlemen I knew in Philadelphia. You are kind and honorable and brave. That is what matters. He shook his head. You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you risked your life for strangers. I know that you have been patient and generous when you could have just pointed us toward the road and left us to manage on our own. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I have never felt before. Victor stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the lake. Katherine, you are in a difficult situation right now. You're grateful, and that is natural, but you should not confuse gratitude with anything else. Katherine rose and followed him, anger flaring. Do not tell me what I feel. I am not some foolish girl who does not know her own mind. I am attracted to you, Victor Maddox. I care about you. And I think you feel the same. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his eyes were blazing. Of course I feel the same. I have felt it since the moment I saw you running through the desert, so fierce and determined. But that does not mean we should act on it. You deserve someone who can give you a real life, not a mountain hermit who barely remembers how to be around people. I do not want someone else. I want you. Katherine, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Victor stood frozen. Then, with a sound that was half groan, half surrender, he pulled her against him and kissed her back. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and Katherine felt like she was finally, truly safe. His lips were gentle despite his rough exterior, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he whispered. The best things usually are. He laughed, a sound of pure surprise, and Katherine felt triumph surge through her. She had made this serious, solitary man laugh. I do not know how to do this, he admitted. I have been alone for so long. Then we will figure it out together. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palms. I am not asking for promises, Victor. I'm just asking you not to walk away from this, from us. He searched her eyes for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, I will try. They kissed again, slower this time, exploring. Katherine felt heat build between them, desire like nothing she had ever experienced. But Victor was careful, keeping himself in check, and eventually they simply held each other by the moonlit lake, content in each other's presence. The next day, everyone noticed the change between them. Timothy grinned knowingly, and Mrs. Donovan looked pleased, as if she had predicted this outcome all along. Victor held Katherine's hand as they walked, no longer hiding his feelings, and Katherine felt happier than she had in years, but their peace was shattered on the 6th day. They were approaching the pass when Victor suddenly held up a hand, signaling everyone to stop. He stood absolutely still, head tilted, listening. What is it? Katherine whispered. Riders! Behind us! Moving fast! Katherine felt ice flood her veins. How did they find us? I do not know. But they are coming. Victor's mind was clearly racing, evaluating options. All right, here is what we do. There's a cave system about a half-mile ahead. We hide there and let them pass. What if they track us to the cave? Timothy asked, his voice shaking. Then I will deal with them. Victor's tone was grim. But hopefully it will not come to that. Now move, all of you, quickly and quietly. They ran. Katherine's heart pounded as she scrambled over rocks, following Victor's lead. Behind them, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Mrs. Donovan was gasping, struggling to keep up, and Victor swept her into his arms and carried her, moving fast despite the extra weight. The cave entrance was a narrow slash in the rock face, barely visible behind a screen of bushes. Victor herded them inside, then erased their tracks as best he could. Inside, the cave was cool and dark, stretching back into the mountain. Victor positioned them deep in the darkness, then returned to the entrance with his rifle. They waited. The hoofbeats grew thunderous, then slowed. Katherine could hear men's voices now, calling to each other. Her heart was in her throat. Tracks end here, one man said, his voice carrying into the cave. They must have gone off trail. Or they are hiding nearby, another voice replied. Katherine's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. It was Richard Sterling, her uncle's business partner, the man she'd been meant to marry. Search the area. She cannot have gone far. Victor tensed beside her, raising his rifle. Katherine put a hand on his arm, silently begging him not to fire unless absolutely necessary. He glanced at her and gave a tiny nod. The men searched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Katherine hardly dared to breathe. If they found the cave, there would be a fight, and even Victor could not defeat 6 armed men alone. Finally, mercifully, Richard Sterling called his men back. "We are wasting time. They must have continued up toward the pass. Come on." The hoofbeats receded, heading higher into the mountains. They waited in the cave until Victor was certain the men were truly gone. Then they emerged into fading daylight, everyone shaken. "That was too close," Mrs. Donovan said, her voice trembling. "They will realize their mistake when they reach the pass and find no sign of us," Victor said. "We cannot go that way now. They will be watching it." "Then how do we get to California?" Katherine asked. Victor's jaw set in determination. "There is another way. An old Paiute trail that crosses further south. It is more dangerous, steeper, and more exposed. But if we move fast, we can reach it before they figure out where we went." "Do we have a choice?" Katherine asked. "Not if you want to live." They traveled through the night, Victor pushing them hard. It was exhausting and frightening, stumbling through darkness with only starlight to guide them. But Victor moved with absolute certainty, and they had no choice but to trust him. By dawn, they had crossed onto the southern trail. It was indeed steep, a narrow path carved into the side of a mountain with a long drop on one side. Katherine tried not to look down as they traversed it, focusing instead on Victor's broad back in front of her. They were 2/3 across when disaster struck. A section of the trail, weakened by spring runoff, gave way beneath Timothy's feet. The boy cried out as he fell, catching himself on the edge, legs dangling over the drop. "Help!" he screamed. "I'm slipping!" Victor was there in an instant, dropping onto his stomach and reaching for Timothy's wrists. "I have got you! Hold on!" Katherine and Mrs. Donovan grabbed Victor's legs, anchoring him as he pulled. For a terrible moment, Katherine thought they would all slide over the edge. Then, with a grunt of effort, Victor hauled Timothy back onto solid ground. They all collapsed in a heap, gasping and shaking. Timothy was crying, and Mrs. Donovan was praying. Victor just held the boy for a moment, his eyes closed. "You are all right," he said firmly. "You are safe. We are all safe." But it was a stark reminder of how dangerous their journey was. They continued with renewed caution, and by nightfall, they had finally crossed into California, leaving the worst of the mountains behind. "From here, it is downhill all the way to Sacramento," Victor said. "We should make it in 2 days." That night, as they camped in a pine forest, Katherine sat with Victor away from the others. "What will you do?" she asked him. "When we reach Sacramento? You said you would try. Did you mean it?" Victor took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I meant it. I do not know what I can offer you, Katherine. I am not a wealthy man. I have no home except these mountains. But if you will have me, I will stay with you. I will do whatever work I can find and build whatever life you want." Tears stung Katherine's eyes. "I do not need wealth. I do not need a mansion. I just need you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Katherine felt the last of her defenses crumble. She loved this man. She loved his strength and his kindness and his quiet courage. She loved the way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. When they broke apart, Victor said, "There is something else. When we reach Sacramento, we should get married, immediately." Katherine blinked. "What?" "Think about it. If you are married, your uncle loses control of your inheritance. The money becomes your husband's to manage. And as your husband, I can fight your uncle's claims in court. It gives you legal protection." "You want to marry me for legal protection?" "No." He cupped her face in his hands. "I want to marry you because I love you, Katherine Hayes. The legal protection is just practical sense." Joy flooded through her. "You love me?" "How could I not? You are fierce and brave and beautiful. You have reminded me what it means to care about something beyond mere survival. So yes, I love you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left in this world making sure you are safe and happy." "I love you too," she whispered, "so much. And yes, I will marry you." Right away, as soon as we reach Sacramento. They kissed again, sealing the promise, and Katherine felt like she was flying. She had run from one man trying to control her life, only to find a man who wanted to share his life with her instead. The difference was everything. They reached Sacramento 2 days later, travel-worn and exhausted, but alive. Victor led them straight to the courthouse, where they found a judge willing to perform a quick marriage ceremony. Katherine, standing in her borrowed men's clothes, married Victor Maddox with Mrs. Donovan and Timothy as witnesses. The judge raised an eyebrow at her attire, but did not comment, perhaps recognizing the desperation in her eyes. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Victor kissed Katherine soundly, and she felt tears of happiness stream down her face. "It is done," Victor said. "You are safe now." They found rooms at a modest boarding house and sent word to Katherine's uncle's lawyers that Katherine Hayes was now Katherine Maddox, legally married and beyond her uncle's control. The response came within days, a furious letter from Uncle Edmund threatening legal action, followed by a more measured letter from his lawyers, acknowledging that the marriage changed the situation significantly. Victor hired a lawyer of his own, a sharp young man named David Chen, who specialized in inheritance law. After reviewing Katherine's case, Mr. Chen was confident they could fight her uncle's control. "The marriage protects you," he explained, "and the fact that your uncle hired men to waylay and potentially harm you is grounds for removing him as trustee entirely. It will take time and it will be expensive, but I believe we can win." "How expensive?" Victor asked, his jaw tight. "Several $1,000s in legal fees, most likely." Victor's expression went carefully blank, and Katherine knew he was calculating how many years of trapping and hunting it would take to earn that kind of money. But Mrs. Donovan, who had stayed with them while waiting for her sister to arrive, spoke up. "I may be able to help with that. My late husband left me with some resources, and I would consider it money well spent to see that wicked man brought to justice." "I cannot accept that," Katherine protested. "You saved my life," Mrs. Donovan said firmly. "If that stagecoach had made it to wherever that driver was taking us, I would likely be dead in the desert. This is the least I can do." It was Timothy who suggested the solution. "What if Mr. Maddox started a guide service? There are people coming west all the time who need help navigating the mountains. He could charge good money for that, enough to pay Mrs. Donovan back and support you both." Victor looked skeptical. "I am not a businessman." "But I am," Katherine said, excitement growing. "Or at least, I learned enough from my father. I could manage the business side while you do the guiding. We could make it work, Victor." Over the following weeks, that is exactly what they did. Victor reluctantly agreed to try, and Katherine threw herself into building Maddox Mountain Guide Service. She designed advertisements, negotiated with hotels to recommend them to travelers, and handled all the bookkeeping. Victor took clients into the Sierra Nevada, teaching them to hunt and fish, showing them the hidden beauty of the high country. It turned out there was significant demand for an experienced guide, especially one with Victor's knowledge and reputation for safety. Word spread quickly, and soon they were booked months in advance. Katherine also continued the legal fight against her uncle. It was a long, frustrating process, but slowly they made progress. Mr. Chen discovered that Uncle Edmund had been embezzling from the trust, taking money that should have been held for Katherine. This strengthened their case considerably. A year after their marriage, the court ruled in Katherine's favor. Uncle Edmund was removed as trustee and ordered to repay the money he had stolen. The full inheritance was placed under Katherine and Victor's joint control. It was not quite the full $200,000 anymore, but it was enough to secure their future comfortably. Katherine's first act was to repay Mrs. Donovan with generous interest. Her second was to buy a small house on the outskirts of Sacramento, with enough land for a garden and stables for the horses Victor used in his guide work. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Victor was attentive and loving, though sometimes Katherine could see him struggling with being around so many people after years of solitude. On those days, she would send him into the mountains alone for a few days, and he would return restored, ready to be part of the world again. Their first child, a son they named James after Victor's brother who died in the war, was born in the spring of 1880. Victor was terrified of fatherhood, afraid he would not know how to be a good father, but his fears proved groundless. He He was patient and gentle with little James, teaching him about the natural world the way his own father had taught him. A daughter, Emma, followed 2 years later, and then another son, William, 2 years after that. Their house was full of noise and laughter, everything Victor's lonely mountain camp had not been. Katherine continued to manage the guide business, which grew large enough that Victor eventually hired 2 younger men to help him lead expeditions. She also began writing articles about the Sierra Nevada for California newspapers, sharing Victor's knowledge of the mountains with a wider audience. Her writing was popular, and she discovered she had a talent for it. On their 5th anniversary, Victor took Katherine back into the mountains, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Donovan, who'd become like a grandmother to them. They camped at the same alpine lake where they had first kissed, and as they sat by the fire, Victor pulled Katherine close. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. "About leaving your old life behind? About marrying a rough mountain man instead of a Philadelphia gentleman?" Katherine turned in his arms to look at him. At 33, Victor was even more handsome than when they had met, his body still powerfully built from years of hard work, though his hair now showed threads of silver at the temples. His face had softened somewhat, the haunted look gone from his eyes, replaced by contentment. "Not a single regret," she said firmly. "You saved my life, Victor, and not just from my uncle's hired men. You saved me from a life of being someone else's property, someone else's decision. You gave me freedom and love and partnership. How could I regret that?" "I never expected to be this happy," Victor admitted. "After the war, I thought I was done with living, that I was just marking time until I died. Then you came running through the desert, and suddenly I had a reason to live again." "We saved each other," Katherine said. "That is what love does." They made love under the stars that night, and Katherine felt the same rush of desire and tenderness she had felt the first time Victor had touched her. Some things, she thought, only got better with time. By the time they returned to Sacramento, Katherine knew she was pregnant again. This child, another daughter they named Sarah after Mrs. Donovan, would be their last. With 4 children and a thriving business, their life was full and rich. Victor never completely lost his need for solitude. Several times a year, he would spend a week or 2 alone in the mountains, reconnecting with the wild places that had sustained him during his darkest years. But he always came home, eager to return to the noisy, chaotic, wonderful life he and Katherine had built together. Timothy Grant became a successful businessman in San Francisco, but remained close with the Maddox family, visiting often and bringing gifts for the children. Mrs. Donovan lived with her sister in Sacramento and was a frequent presence in their home, beloved by everyone. Even Richard Sterling, Katherine's uncle's business partner, faced consequences. Investigation into his affairs revealed he'd been complicit in Uncle Edmund's schemes. He lost his business and reputation, last heard of working as a clerk in a Chicago office. As for Uncle Edmund himself, he died 3 years after losing the court case, bankrupt and disgraced. Katherine felt no satisfaction at his death, only sadness that he had chosen greed over family. She did not attend his funeral. The years passed peacefully. Katherine published a book about the Sierra Nevada that became quite successful. Victor's reputation as a guide grew to the point that wealthy clients came from as far as New York and even Europe to hire him. They were not rich by Philadelphia standards, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, happy. James, their eldest, showed his father's love of the wilderness and began working as a guide alongside Victor when he turned 18. Emma became a teacher, passionate about education. William studied law, inspired by Mr. Chen's work on his mother's behalf. And young Sarah, the baby, surprised everyone by developing a talent for painting, capturing the mountain landscapes her father loved in vivid colors. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered at their home for a celebration. Katherine stood on the porch, watching Victor play with their grandchildren. James had married and had 2 children of his own, and marveled at how far they had come from that desperate day in the Nevada desert. Mrs. Donovan, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, came to stand beside Katherine. "You did well for yourself," the older woman said with satisfaction. "I knew the moment I saw that mountain man that he was something special." "You did," Katherine agreed. "You told me to trust him." "And you did. That took courage." "Or desperation," Katherine said, echoing Victor's words from long ago. "Sometimes they are the same thing," Mrs. Donovan said, and they both laughed. That night, after the guests had left and the children had gone to bed in their old rooms, Katherine and Victor sat together on the porch, watching the stars. "Do you ever think about that day?" Katherine asked. "The day you found us?" "Every day," Victor said. "It was the day my life truly began." "Mine too." She leaned against him, comfortable and secure in his embrace. "Thank you for catching that stagecoach, mountain man. Thank you for bringing me back. I would do it again in a heartbeat." He kissed the top of her head. 1,000 times over. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other, their voices carrying across the California hills. It was a sound Victor had once listened to alone in his mountain camp, wrapped in loneliness and memories of war. But he was not alone anymore. He had Katherine and their children and grandchildren, and a life so full and rich he sometimes could hardly believe it was real. Katherine had escaped the cage of her uncle's control and found freedom in the arms of a mountain man who taught her what love truly meant. Not possession or obligation, but partnership and respect and choosing each other every single day. Their love story had begun with violence and desperation, with a stagecoach driven hard to lose her, and a mountain man who caught the coach and brought her back. But it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation. As they grew older together, Victor's hair turned fully silver, and Katherine's face gained lines from years of laughter and sun. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, rooted deep like the ancient pines of the Sierra Nevada. When Victor was 65, he finally retired from active guiding, turning the business over to James and a younger partner. He and Katherine spent their later years traveling, seeing parts of the country neither had visited before. But they always returned to Sacramento, to the home they had built, the life they had created. They were in their 70s when Mrs. Donovan passed away peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, Katherine spoke about how this remarkable woman had been present at the most important moment of her life, had witnessed the beginning of her love story with Victor, and had become family in every way that mattered. "She taught me that family is not just blood," Katherine said. "It is the people who stand beside you in crisis, the people who help you build your life. We will miss her every day." Victor held Katherine's hand throughout the service, his grip still strong despite his age. They had lost friends and family over the years, as all long-lived couples do, but they still had each other. On their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same courthouse where they had first married. The judge who had married them was long dead, but the new judge, a young woman who had read Katherine's books, was honored to perform the ceremony. 50 years ago, I stood before a judge in borrowed clothes and married this man," Katherine said, holding Victor's hands. "I married him to escape my uncle's control, yes, but also because I loved him. I loved his courage and his kindness and his strength. 50 years later, I love him even more. He is my partner, my protector, my best friend. He is the father of my children and the keeper of my heart, and I would marry him again, 1,000 times over." Victor, never comfortable with public speaking, kept his vows simple. "Katherine, you saved my life. You brought me back from the darkness and taught me how to live again. Everything good in my life came from you. I love you today, as much as I did when I first kissed you by that mountain lake, and I will love you until my last breath." There was not a dry eye in the courthouse. They threw a party that lasted into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Victor, despite his age, danced with Katherine until she begged for mercy, laughing. "You are trying to kill me, old man," she teased. "Never," he said, pulling her close. "I plan to keep you around for at least another 50 years. But of course, no one lives forever." Victor passed away in his sleep at the age of 79, his hand clasped in Katherine's. He had lived a long, full life, far longer than he had expected after the war. He died peacefully, surrounded by family, in the house he and Katherine had made into a home. Katherine mourned deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had their children and grandchildren around her, and she still had work to do. She wrote one final book, a memoir about her life with Victor, about the mountain man who had saved her and the love they had built together. The book became her most successful, touching readers across the country with its story of courage, love, and second chances. Katherine donated the proceeds to a foundation she established in Victor's name, dedicated to helping young people learn wilderness skills and develop confidence through outdoor education. She lived another 10 years after Victor's passing, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She died at 89, surrounded by 3 generations of descendants, her final words a whispered "I love you" to the husband who waited for her on the other side. They were buried side by side in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Sacramento, their graves marked by simple stones. But their true memorial was the family they had created, the business they had built, the books Katherine had written, and the foundation that bore Victor's name. James, now an old man himself, stood at his parents' graves with his own children and grandchildren gathered around. "They had quite a love story," his daughter said. "They did," James agreed. "It started with a chase across the Nevada desert and a mountain man brave enough to stand against hired killers. But it grew into something extraordinary. A partnership built on love and respect and choosing each other every single day." "Tell us the story," one of the great-grandchildren begged. "Tell us how they met." So James did, as his father had told him many times, and his mother had written in her book. He told them about the stagecoach driven hard to lose her, about the mountain man who caught the coach and brought her back. He told them about the dangerous journey through the Sierra Nevada, about the growing love between 2 people who should never have met, but who found each other exactly when they needed to. And as he told the story, the desert sun setting behind them and painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, James could almost see them. His parents, young again, standing by an alpine lake in the mountains Victor loved. His father, tall and strong and handsome, pulling his mother close. His mother, fierce and beautiful and brave, tilting her head up for a kiss. Their love had been tested by danger and distance, by fear and uncertainty. But it had endured because they had chosen each other, again and again, through 50 years of life together. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in mountain passes and desert heat. A story of rescue and redemption, of 2 lonely souls who found each other and decided to build something lasting. And it all started with a stagecoach, driven hard to lose her, and a mountain man who caught the coach and brought her back. The end.